A lot of countries will need their own AI factories, their own AI models for their own sovereignty. That's massive energy and water. But everyone's trying to figure out how they'll make money out of it.
Kevin O'Donovan, technology evangelist and founder of A Bit of This and That.
How this is going to impact our society, what we can do to mitigate the risks that are related with this.
If a certain country doesn't have a big AI factory for their own language models and their own companies to be able to use, you could end up in a world in 5 years' time where to get access to the latest models is a pay to play. And if you don't have the money, you can't be competitive enough. That's the kind of strategic shift that's going on. Every country will have to, in some ways, look after it.
Hello, everyone. My team and I have been crafting content and stories that inform, inspire, empower, and bring real value to you. If you haven't already, please take a moment to check that you're subscribed. It's the easiest way to support our work and stay updated with every new release. Join us on this journey of learning and discovery. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for our latest drops.
Welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show. Once again, powered and in collaboration with our platforms citiesapc.com, businessapc.net, wisdomia.ai. We are here once again to profile global leaders and thought leaders that are pushing the boundaries of how we deal with technology, how we deal with business, especially how we can actually look at the ever-accelerating convergence of all the different areas that make our lives fantastic and challenging at the same time. So I'm very excited to bring to our series today someone that I've been engaging and following for a long time, and as well, probably one of the biggest experts in a lot of the areas we're going to be talking today, and we've been actually discussing this in this series for the last years. So welcome to our series, Kevin O'Donovan. Kevin is, I would say, a personality out of the box because he has decades of experience in technology, and he's been actually literally looking at the convergence of a lot of these technologies, but as well from the theory to the practice. His work has been looking at especially supporting the companies in terms of how they can look at the impact of these technologies by bridging the gap between and I like his own words, the art of the possible and what is feasible today. But it's been as well a technology advocate that has been looking at innovation and a lot of areas in terms of discoveries, and it does a lot of counseling and support for some of the top brands in the world. And it does from keynote presentations to research, technical advisory, and as well, he has a lot of work in terms of go-to-market strategies. And for you to understand the impact of his work, he, before being a thought leader and working as a creator, has been as well at the previously senior leadership roles in Compaq, HP, and Intel, where actually led worldwide energy sales and business departments. And from his perspective in terms of the work today that I think you can find in a lot of these social media profiles that you can see below in whatever channel you're listening to us, has been, I would say, as one of the most compelling personalities working in some of the areas of convergence, especially between the energy industry, with a focus on topics that are critical for our days, like industrial metaverse, digital twin technology, AI, and the energy transition. And Kevin is the founder of the consultancy A Bit of This and That, which provides advisory and influencer thought leadership services. Just as well, some of the highlights, Kevin O'Donovan is an acknowledged thought leader that has been recognized by such big players like Thinkers 360, and has been probably, I think, one of the companies and communities that has been very involved with Siemens, which is a fantastic corporation with more than 100 years. And you can find him, of course, on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Medium. Just in terms of the areas, and this interview is going to be touching some of the areas of expertise of Kevin. And I want for our audience to be involved on this. We're going to be talking quite technical areas, but we're going to try to explain. So industrial metaverse, digital twin technology, the concept of energy transition and how this can actually increase the energy mix that is key for the personalization of energy that we all need, and of course, AI and data. So I could say a lot more. I'm very excited to have here Kevin in this series, and I wanted to do it for a long time. And Kevin, thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to talk with you.
No, hi, come here. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm delighted to be here, and yeah, it is a fascinating time. Both challenges and opportunities ahead of us with that convergence of technology. So it's a fun time.
No, it's definitely amazing. So, Kevin, I want to start by the foundations. I always like to look at the foundations. So, as someone that has been um, in the industry for some time, you went through a lot of revolutions, a lot of different things. But I want to start with the basics, from Ireland to the world. And I forgot to mention that, but you are a proud Irish gentleman. So, tell us a bit about your background. And let's say if you would go to your 12 years old self, what you would be imagine doing, what you're doing now, and where you're doing, and where you're doing as well.
My 12-year-old self would have been, yeah, I'm not sure it would have planned out where I've ended up. So yeah, I'm Irish. I grew up in just outside Bandon in West Cork in Ireland in the 70s and 80s. And as a 12-year-old, in the world that I grew up in there, my family had just got a car. We had a color television with two TV stations, and the phone was a phone box that was communal in the village. And we were the house closest to the phone box, so if the phone rang, you go down and answer it, and there'd be, can you go up the road to one of the neighbours and tell them so-and-so's on the phone for them? Now, I suppose my technology background kind of came in was my brother actually brought back from the UK an Atari 400 when I was about 15, 14 or 15. So I started hacking away on a computer, and that's probably got my interest going. I did electronic engineering in the University of Limerick. Now, to date myself, I came out of college in 1990. And to give you an idea of kind of Ireland at the time, we were the first class from the electronic engineering degree that came out where more than half of us got jobs in Ireland. In Ireland in the day, there's a lot of Irish people around the world. We travel a lot for all sorts of reasons. But to cut a long story short, I kind of picked up the passion of electronics was kind of the cool thing at the time. It was a starting industry. Computing was just starting to take off. And I fancied building things. And that was kind of the angle that I went into. So my background is hard for people to believe. But yeah, I'm an electronic engineer with a software focus.
Oh, fantastic. So if you go back to as well to your educational and formation milestones, I think this is a key element for me personal, and as well, I always like to know that with my friends and the people that I highlight in this series. What would be the areas or the educational formation milestones? You mentioned your brother, computer, your education, but there's always a small thing and might be finding a new area that you were not. And of course, if you look back all these years, Ireland right now is a tech powerhouse, but it was not probably when we were growing up. And as well, actually, right now, the changes that we are seeing in the world were not just 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So a bit of a background on that, and especially on the educational side of formation.
I suppose the thing that stuck with me, obviously went through primary school, secondary school, went off to University of Limerick, and I was the first for my family to go to university. So to your point, back then, going to university and stuff wasn't a big thing in Ireland. A lot of let's say, jobs, and it was farming, it was tourism, it was some manufacturing, but it was only in the 90s that it really took off when a lot of the big tech manufacturing plants came into Ireland. I suppose the thing that stuck with me would be a guy by the name of Ed Walsh was the guy who set up the University of Limerick. It was an NIHE back in the day. It turned into the University of Limerick while I was there. But his thing was to give people a broad, make them flexible. So what I found fascinating was that as I was going through my college career, and I did a work practicum, work experience with a Fraunhofer Institute in near Erlangen in Nuremberg, way back one summer. And I found it fascinating that all the other students I was working with were very specialized. And what I figured out was that in University of Limerick, we were kind of getting a broad grounding in lots of topics to educate us for being able to adapt to all sorts of work when we came out of college. And we also had cooperative education. I spent, 9 months working in analog devices. while you're in college. So it was kind of like a vocational training, for want of a better word, because you get to see what it's like in the real world, working in a factory, working in manufacturing. Now it's high tech, the fab for analog devices in Limerick. But I suppose the thing that stuck with me was that I don't know what I don't know, and you always have to adapt. Because if you become indispensable in a particular topic, you will become dispensable because you just dig a hole for yourself. So you always need to adapt.
As adaptation is a key thing, especially with everything we're going right now. So you start your career working with major corporations, and you had positions in business, marketing, working with some of the biggest tech players, some of them including Intel, where we were for 13 years. It's quite a big benchmark, but we work as well with HP and as well in different other corporations. So tell us a bit about this background, and especially, for instance, in 13 years, of course, a lot of things changed, especially in the case of being in one company for all this time. So some of these positions you had, how this kind of material personality to be the person you are now, and as well to make you the thinker, because of course, one of the advantages of your knowledge is that you're not just a guy that goes and talks on YouTube. You actually have knowledge with big corporations. And we have a lot of these people. Of course, I'm one of them, but both I think you and me have a bit more of a expertise, and especially you, of course, leading big corporations is not a small task, both as a sales director. For instance, in the case of Intel, you were a worldwide sales director. And in the case, you start with different other positions. So I want to highlight this, especially for people listening to us, because I think the kind of role, like you said, you finished the last question right now talking about change and the capacity to adapt is a critical element. And now it's even faster than even when we were these previous experiences.
We'll come on to today's world, but I've been in the, let's say, technology, IT industry for 30 years more. I have never seen the pace of change that we have right now, and the opportunities and the challenges. But I suppose if I go back, so I left college in 1990. I got a job with a small software company out of the UK, but they were setting up an office in Dublin called Third Wave. And we were primarily doing banking software. Now, I was a software electronic engineer. I had learned BASIC and assembly and C. And the first thing they taught us was to learn COBOL, because we were doing a lot of banking software. And COBOL was like, wow, that exists. This is the 90s. And cut a long story short, I became client server was kind of the cool thing at the time. And Third Wave was bringing out client server based products. So on IBM OS2, and we were moving from mainframes to PCs. So I was the guy doing the database layer and the comms. For anyone that was around back then, it was LU 6.2. That was the communications protocol for OS2 and whatever. So that was fascinating, and we were migrating everything from mainframes. So Tandem Himalayas and IBM Kicks and. So that's where I kind of got my technology, what would you say, OS2 background. And I then I was headhunted by Ingress, the database company, to work for them. I ended up there for a year. We were porting the Ingress database to OS2. So again, I was, hardcore engineer under the covers, migrating from Unix to whatever. So I suppose over those 4 years, I got a good understanding of how operating systems work. Like Windows was only just coming out at the time. OS2 was way ahead, right? And then I was headhunted to join this company in Munich. And I'd been in Germany, so I was kind of interested. The company was Compaq, and they were looking for an OS2 pre-sales engineer for their European team based out of Munich. So went off there. At the time, Compaq was like number 7 PC manufacturer on the planet, right? And joined an incredible team there. A lot of my good friends to this day, we were all part of that team. As Compaq went from number 7 to number 1 worldwide. That was before Dell rocked up and whatever became number 1. But again, the focus there was all about, here's the latest and greatest technology, the latest and greatest chips from Intel. latest greatest technology, storage, fiber channel attached storage, Wi-Fi was just coming out, yada yada. And always trying to show people the art of the possible. We had a pre-sales lab in Munich, the proof of concept lab, where we'd bring in customers to bring their mainframe apps and get them working on a client server environment. So that was tough work, but that was fascinating. And cut long story short, I ended up being the pre-sales director for Compaq for Europe, Middle East, and Africa through the years of progression. We bought digital, and for folks that know me, I'm Irish. I now live in the south of France because in 2000, after the digital acquisition, we merged our pre-sales teams, and digital had a huge site here in Sofia Antipolis, just outside Nice. So I got relocated here with my wife and kids in 2000 and been here ever since. But seeing the whole merger acquisition roll forward another 2 years, we got acquired by HP because Compaq at the time was going bust, right? We were in the red. So we got acquired by HP, and I was then part of what was known as the clean room team. I was part of the merger team for about 12, 18 months because that deal, if people remember, there was a whole court case and it dragged on and on. But I got to see a lot of, I was a technical pre-sales guy, but I always kind of say that the merger experience was like a mini MBA because we got to see all sorts of things. The way it worked was there was 10 of us from Compaq, 10 from HP. We were flown into Zurich every Monday morning. We had to step away from our jobs for 12 months. And we were teams of 3, person from HP, person from Compaq, and a guy from McKinsey, planning the merger. So that I suppose gave me a lot of insight into corporate politics, for want of a better word, and how all that plays out. So that was fascinating and intriguing and soul destroying at the same time. But cut long story short, the deal was when I went into the clean room team was that you probably stayed in the company for another 12 months after the deal closed and then you left. Because to be honest, we were taking things apart, right? It was the buzzword at the time was value capture. You had thousands of people in Compaq, thousands of people in digital, and there was a cost of sales model where we needed less people than the combined. So finished up with Compaq, and I took a year off and traveled around, whatever, had a good year off, and then I was asked by Intel to come join them. So then I ended up at Intel for 13 years. So I'll stop there for a second.
So I want to touch what you said. So when you are in these big corporations, and I think it's one thing that unless you are there, you don't understand. There's a huge amount of work, like you said, the political corporate work, which is key because otherwise you cannot survive and you cannot strive as well. And then there's a huge amount of work as well on keeping the innovation path and keeping a big boat. And I think all the metaphor of a small boat and a big boat. If you're a startup, you can do all the mistakes and go fast. But if you are a big corporation like that, it's much more complex because you have boards, you have investors, you have shareholders, you have a lot of people there. So I just want to touch that because it's something I think people don't touch enough. And especially your expertise is unique because you start there and then you end up actually becoming an influencer and a creator that is outsider, and you can do whatever you want on that level. But I want to touch, I think for people listening to us, especially young people that are looking at these jobs or starting their careers, and we have a lot of people from universities, what would be the advice and as well some of the learnings that you got from that experience?
I suppose the main thing, and this is regardless of the corporation or the company, and whether it's big or small, the folks that know me well, my passion outside of technology is sci-fi and history, ancient history and medieval history. And my thing is that, and I don't care what country, race, religion, color, whatever you are, human nature hasn't changed in 4,000 or 5,000 years. And that plays in business, and whether that's in a big corporate or it is in you're out looking for funding, people like you, people don't like you. There's a lot of skullduggery goes on behind the scenes. We'll probably touch on it later when I look at. I think AI is doing more now than ever before for breaking down silos inside in companies. but people still have to give up their data, and that's power. And that's the human change, right? And we'll come back to that. So the human nature hasn't changed. And as I say, I don't care what country, company, color, race, religion, human nature hasn't changed. So you have to be aware of that. And you know, I have the opportunity right now of focusing on the technology. I don't do implementations. I don't do rollouts. I don't do what I would call the hard work. It's like, look at the art of the possible, and this is how you could make it work for you. But human nature hasn't changed, and if you, as good as your product is, as good as the technology is, as you know, this makes perfect sense. If you don't understand the power dynamics and the fun and games going on behind the scene, it's going to be a tough gig. And we always try and change it, but sometimes it's just not that easy to change, right? Corporate culture that's the oil tanker. It is very hard to change. And I've seen it in small startups as well, right? Where you have brilliant founders, they have their way of doing things, and they may not change. And I go back to the thing is that I don't care how successful someone is, you always have to adapt, because the world is changing around you. So what worked last year may not work this year. So you need flexibility in your skill set.
Now, this is a key thing. So I want to touch. So from these experiences, you end up actually making a transition from being a corporate business leader and starting a role as a leading global influencer, thought leader, and creator and researcher, I would say, because you have all of these things working together. So how was that transition? Because I think one of the things that I want to highlight here is I believe that these are going to be the jobs more important going forward, because any corporation, like you mentioned, a startup or a corporation, will need people like you to come and look at them, promote them, even research with them and doing things. And sometimes you need outsiders to go. But I want to see this transition and how you lead this new part of your career right now. So
I suppose the missing piece of the puzzle to get to where I was how I ended up where I am today was a lot to do with Intel. and so when I joined Intel, I was taken on as a kind of a pre-sales leader for their technical team. But after about 12 months, I was asked to head up strategic marketing for Intel in Europe. A small team. Intel, being Intel, had a large process around, you know, what are the new trends going on, and we'd report back to corporate, and there was corporate strategic discussions with the then CEO, Paul Otellini, and his management team every couple of months. So I was doing all that, and this is back in 2005-06. And green computing was a thing back then. Everyone was, are you green? The whole sustainability thing was kind of kicking off, but it wasn't very formalized. And cut long story short, as part of the business development and whatever, one of the things I kept harping on about was that there's got to be new opportunities for Intel in the energy sector, because energy is not going away, and we had renewables kicking off and all sorts of things. And I'll give you a simple example. Like our role in Intel was, we used to joke, was about creating markets, right? And how do we find a new place to put a piece of silicon? And at the time, one of the things we were chasing from the energy side was people started saying, we're going to have smart meters. So I was going, what's a smart meter? Oh, it'll have a silicon chip in it. So it was like, woohoo, can we put a Pentium or a whatever, a Centrino chip in a smart meter? Now, we figured out very quickly that this is like 2005 and 6, the level of intelligence and silicon capabilities you needed in a smart meter was like, what was in your digital watch? Remember those back in the day? It was fairly small. But what we then figured out was that, well, if somebody deployed about 1,000 smart meters, someone bought a server in the data center to process the data. So we saw it as a business accelerator. So, and that was an example. We did the same with drones, with augmented reality. So I started dabbling in a lot of the new technologies, not because it was going to be millions of devices with a chip in them. It was the data it created that would enable a lot of other business use cases and whatever. So long story short, then we started in Intel, again, this is going way back, we started creating vertical sales teams, and I was asked to set up and lead our sales into the energy sector. So that's how I got into more into the energy world, oil and gas, renewables, everything around the energy transition. When I was in Intel, we also did a lot of stuff. I used to do sales training. I was involved in a lot of special projects. Intel, to its credit, back in the day, got everybody. There was like a corporate thing as our sales training every year was start creating a profile for yourself on LinkedIn. Like this is 15, 20 years ago. Twitter, whatever. And we'd go to events and we'd have our partners or we'd have our own booth and stuff there. And cut long story short, we'd spend a lot of time and money and effort setting up all these demos. And I'd be going, well, whoever's here sees them and they're great. But surely we can do something for internal training or whatever. So I started videoing the demos with people with a smartphone and a selfie stick. And you can find them on YouTube going back like 15 years, right? They're shockingly bad, but had to start somewhere. And I just kept doing that. And right up to when I left Intel. And Intel asked us, I live in the south of France. My wife's German. So I'm Irish. Wife's German, living in the south of France. I'm all in Europe, right? 100%. Intel asked us to move back to Munich. And I was coming up to my 50th birthday. I'd always worked in corporate. And I enjoyed it. I was seen as very apolitical, but I enjoyed the whole hustle and bustle. And I said, you know what? We'll stay here. And I left Intel, took about 6-9 months off and set up my own company here. And that's how I kind of got into the whole... I'm not a big fan of the word influencer because it means so many things to many people. Believe it or not, when I was in Intel, the sales team we led, this is like 2008, 9, 10, we were known as influencer sales because Intel had a push-pull model. You had the people who made the chips, we sold those to the people who made boxes, the OEMs, the ODMs, and. But you had to create pull in the marketplace with customers like oil and gas companies did not buy chips from Intel. They bought solutions from companies who then went to Dell or IBM to provide the hardware. So our job was to make them aware that, do you realize if you have this management chip in your industrial PC that goes out into wind turbines, you can update the firmware remotely. You don't need to send a guy out in a helicopter. Like that saves you money. You can use a drone to do a flare stack inspection on a refinery. You don't have to shut down the refinery to send a guy up a scaffold. That saves you money. So a lot of the stuff that I learned was that it's not just about how cool the technology is. It's about how do you turn that into tangible gain and sell it to people. And if I may, I suppose I give you another example. Back in, it was just starting out when I was in Compaq and HP, but obviously then with Intel, we had a big push on cloud. And like I was running around Europe and Middle East and Africa talking about cloud is the next big thing. And a lot of people that know me to this day were kind of going, Kev, cloud over my dead body. We are never going to the cloud. And I think this is relevant to AI and data silos and because back in the day, the IT director, the guy in big companies, had his data center. And he had a CapEx budget and he had an OpEx budget. And it gave him a lot of power around the top table. And we were coming in going, I'll tell you what, you'll take your data center, back in that day, you'd sell it off to a Capgemini or somebody, you know, the shared services thing. Or you'd start looking at the new kids on the block, which was AWS and Google and IBM data centers and stuff. And many of them were telling me over a beer, Kev, like, if we do that, then my budget is going to be a third of what it is. And my head count shrinks down because they'll be all gone. I don't have the same amount of power around the top table when decisions are being made. So that's back to the human nature thing. Now, what we then did was we were talking to the IT directors and they were going like, this is not good for me politically. So what we did was we did an entire campaign with various OEMs and whatever, talking to the CFO to explain to them how much money they'd save. They thought it was a brilliant idea. So that accelerated the deployment of cloud over the concerns of some IT directors because the human nature element was kind of taken out of it. Does that make sense?
No, it's amazing. And I love how all of these things work together. And I have similar experience in completely different areas. But I think this is one thing that I would say most of the schools and our educational systems are not preparing us. And I want to touch this. This is a key element, like you said. So you partly within the organization you start building that component of research that became job and the position. So I want to touch, you mentioned business, marketing, and research. And then if you look now, sales, marketing, influencer, creative relationships are all increasingly integrated, especially the big organizations that know how to do it. Of course, it's quite complex because most of the sales business people right now are experts, like you are an expert in technology, otherwise you cannot sell a technology. So it's no longer just a kind of selling something, but you have to know about the thing. And it's a thing that is a changing thing. And then, of course, there's how you reach people, how you reach departments, how you reach CFOs, how you reach CTOs, how you reach CEOs, which is partly the work you're doing now. So I want to touch this because this is something that when you talk about the creative economy, like you said, the influencer context is something. There's influencers, there's creator, there's thought leader, and there's I would say industry researcher, let's put it that way. All of these things combined together. Even an influencer in fashion will need to know about the fashion he's talking about. And in this case, it's a bit more sensitive and more because, of course, if you're looking at products that cost millions of dollars, you definitely need to know what you're talking about and you need to explain very well. So I want to touch this, and as well on the second layer of the question, how we got the strength for going from one big position, I'm sure well paid, to become independent and launch your corporate or your career as an influencer thought leader?
Oof, there's a lot to unpack in that. I suppose let me put it this way, and I'll come back to
no worries.
Leaving the big corporate and being out on my own, because that was a culture shock, to be quite honest, and good and bad, right? But I'll come back to that, to remind me of that. We'll probably talk about it later when we're talking about digital trends and industry and metaverse and whatever. We have all of these terms for things, concepts, products, and if you look at influencer, thought leader, researcher, whatever, you could have a long list. I'm kind of against putting someone into a pigeonhole, because there's overlap and there's all sorts of things. People say, oh, someone's a thought leader or someone's an influencer. If you're the head of a very large corporation, if you're Elon Musk or you're Roland Bush or you're whoever, like, you're an influencer, right? Because they may not be making TikTok videos all the time, but like what they do influences countries, economies, markets, whatever. So then to say, well, they're an influencer, and then you have someone who's talking about the latest, whatever, cool sports thing, and they're an influencer, I'm kind of going, that's kind of hard to put them in the same box. So I think it comes back to the business context, and all of the stuff I do is in relation to, like, say, technology and business to business. And I think a lot of it you can, I think I said earlier, I'm not a big fan of the word influencer. I kind of call myself a technology evangelist. And cut a long story short, I think a lot of it comes down to the human nature. People trust someone. Yeah, well, you either do or you don't, right? Or whatever. And if they trust you, or trust the person and trust your opinion and trust your point of view, they may not agree with you, but they think you're being authentic and there's no hidden hidden connotations behind it and whatever, then they trust you, and you can call yourself whatever you want. And I suppose that the advantage I have of being independent, and you mentioned some of the advisory work and stuff I do. I do some work with, like, my biggest limitation is my time, right? Because I can only do so many things. My company is a SASU in France, so it's a limited company, one employee. That's me. And cut a long story short, I play devil's advocate. And what I mean by that is a company will, under NDA or behind closed doors, it'll be, here's our go-to-market plan, here's our sales strategy, here's where we're headed. Rip it apart. Behind closed doors. It's no blog post, there's no whatever. And because of a lot of the work, I used to do competitive training in Intel. We used to do the AMD and all the other competitors, whatever, and we'd have role plays and this, that, and the other. And I have spent a lot of my time talking to people in industry where I'm trying to sell them something. So I know all the nasty questions they can ask you to kind of blow a sales guy out of the water. And some of the questions never have an answer, right? They're just trying to not change and whatever. So a lot of the stuff I will do with companies is that I'll go in and play devil's advocate. And then to be quite honest, is like, because I'm not an employee there, I don't really have to worry about hurting anyone's ego or being politically incorrect. Now, obviously, I don't mean that in a bad way. But it's just, yeah, I give people my honest opinion and kind of go, well, here's my outside in perspective, and I'm independent. Because the other thing, people that know me, the thing I do not do, I do not engage in anything to do with sales commission, reference sales, or whatever, because to me that blows my independence out the window. No, I'll introduce people because I go to a lot of events, I meet a lot of people, shake hands, kiss babies. So I'll introduce people, but I think it's back to, if people trust you, and you know, the old phrase is, it takes a long time to build up trust and you can lose it overnight, right? But I think in today's world, people are looking for people, and we all have the people that we trust, and if you can build that for yourself and be flexible enough to know that you're not the God's gift in everything or certain things, I think that just helps us in today's world of being, I don't know, years ago it was like a trusted advisor. They may not agree with you, but at least they'll value your opinion, if that makes sense.
No, this is amazing. And I believe this is a key element, because like you said, it's about these relationships that we create that makes business and new careers. So I want to touch still, how did you start becoming this creator, and as well creating your own consultancy company, and as well doing this as a professional?
So so when I was asked by Intel to move back to Munich, and we decided that we were going to stay here, and as I said, I was hitting 50 and I wanted to go off and do something else. It wasn't a shock that I suddenly was told you have no job next week. I had 6, 9, 12 months to plan around it. And you asked financially and whatever. Look, I was working in France 13 years. If you're in France and you're laid off, it's not a bad country with redundancy packages and whatever, right? So I had the benefit of financial runway. So I said I'd go off and I would set up my business. I wasn't sure what I would. I thought consulting. That was my kind of thing. I'd be a consultant. And when I was asked for a company name, and here in France you have to have a legal company name, obviously, and it has to be a name that is not taken. You can have all the usual. And someone was asking me when I was finishing up in Intel, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, a bit of this and that. and that's where my company name came from, a bit of this and that. So with my lawyers here and whatever, when I was setting up the company, they were, you can't call it that. And I was like, yes, you can. There's no limit. There's no language thing in France, and it's not taken. So hence my company name, bit of this and that. And the one thing I would say to people, if you're changing roles, whether it's planned or unplanned or whatever, is you got to stay visible. You have to own your own destiny. So I was finishing up an Intel. I had garden leave. I had financial parachute. But I said, I'm not going to vanish. I will keep going to events on my own dime. And I will keep doing videos, and I will keep making people aware that I'm still there and I'm doing stuff. So I always say to people when they say to me, oh, I'm finishing up at a company for whatever reason, I was like, don't vanish. Because if you're out of sight and out of mind in this world, I don't care what your network, and many people have brilliant internal networks and companies, but they're not that known outside. And I'm not talking about being an influencer and advocate and all this stuff, but just people don't know what you do because you don't tell anyone. Everyone in around you knows it, but you leave that company, you're out of that network, you're out of sight, out of mind. So I'm a big believer in just continuing on. So I continued on. I kept going to events and whatever. And then companies started coming to me going, we like what you do. Can you do it for us? And of course, then I turned it into a fee-based service, right? And a lot of my work over the last 8 years is the advocacy. So that's where I'm off at the events. So I'm at Yokogawa's Beyond Borders tour next week. The week after, I'm at ADIPEC, the biggest oil and gas conference out in Abu Dhabi. The week after that, I'm at Web Summit. The week after that, I'm at Inlet Europe, the big utility conference in Bilbao. And the week after that, I'm at SPS up in Nuremberg. So that's November gone. So I'm off doing what I do. And because I then get to see and meet the cool kids and see what everyone's doing, that helps me understand, well, what's the art of the possible today? And at least 50% of my role today is that, and then the other is the advisory work, the workshops. Come in and explain to us what's going on with digital twins, what's the industrial metaverse all about. People coming in and say, Kev, can you do devil's advocate on our whatever plan strategy behind closed doors? And I operate as a tech scout for people. So people would say, look, we can't go to all these events, but can you keep an eye out for this, this, and this? And then that's a service. And because I get to see what people are doing, I can report on, well, here's what they announced and here's what I see. And obviously I add my own commentary, right? And it's nothing to do with due diligence on merger and acquisitions and anything that was under NDA. That's whatever, that stays in my head. But it's just what do you see at an event? Who announced what was the vibe around, and just making people aware that, like, guys, you need to keep an eye on. If you're in this company or in this thing, like we talk about quantum computing maybe, like we're all talking about AI and whatever. Quantum is coming. It's not going to be here tomorrow morning, but like these are the kind of things people at a strategic level need to keep their eye on, that there is so many things coming down the line at us that you can't just ignore them, because then we'll be in a fire drill. Does that make sense?
Completely. And it's a very important thing for there's a lot of things you touch. And I would say that this is incredible for people listening to us, wherever you're a startup or a corporation, or even a young student that wants to learn to this, because this is actually the future of the world economy. But I think we have a problem of demystifying this and bringing this to the real world, because people don't understand like you said, you go to an event, you know what's going on, you know the trends, you explain, and of course your posts and your content is amazing on that. I learn about it every day, and I look at people like you to understand what is happening, and as well to complement some of my research and even to find new ways. So I want to go right now, because you touch a lot of different things. I want to probably touch in 3 parts of that. So first part, so the 4 areas of research where I've been, actually, we mentioned that at the beginning, is industrial metaverse, digital twin technology, energy transition, and AI and data. So let's go one by one. So let's start by industrial metaverse, because these are areas where you are a global expert, but as well, I think a lot of people listening to us probably are still struggling to understand it. So probably start with the definition of the industrial metaverse, and then how you see that applying to all the different things, especially probably your work with Siemens, all the work with a lot of different corporations, for instance, energy, and it touches a lot of things, one by one. So starting with that one.
So I've always been a fan of, as I say, new technologies, and I was messing around with VR, and you'll see stuff around my office and whatever, VR and XR and AR and whatever for years, and I was always fascinated by it. And it was back in the summer of 21, I think, at Inlet Europe, they asked me to do a technology presentation as part of the event on future trends. And I said, you know what? We're building the energy metaverse. And they were like, what? So I did a presentation on that. Now, I did that in November, the month before Meta changed their name or Facebook changed their name to Meta, and suddenly metaverse became a whatever. What are they doing? Cut a long story short, I have been very fortunate. I do a lot of work with Siemens, but let's say, I wouldn't say advisory, but a lot of stuff with their teams, and also the advocacy stuff. And it was with Cedric Nike and his team around that time. Siemens had always been talking about digital meets physical, and they had that entire digital thing, digital thread, and then whatever. And I was like, you're building the industrial metaverse. And cut a long story short, that name stuck. And to me, the industrial metaverse is a convergence of technologies. And we could spend a whole Netflix episode on this thing, or Netflix series. But if I look at, and the way I kind of look at things is that, look at the advancements in silicon. CPUs, GPUs, NPUs, DPU, pick a whatever. Look at the advancements in comms. Everything's getting smaller. You have different power electronics coming at us. Infineon with their silicon carbide. More and more capabilities are being put into devices, whether you're wearing them, they're things under the desk, they're in the cloud, whatever. So that convergence of technologies enables us to have more compute and more comms than we ever dreamt of. You know, that I ran the POC labs for Compaq and then HP. We had multi-million-dollar labs where we bring customers. I have more compute power in my mobile phone now than we did back in 2000. And we had racks of the stuff. So like, it is incredible where we've come from. So the industrial metaverse to me is the ability to digitize your factory, your entire supply chain. Now, some people will talk about, yeah, metaverse has a bad name and it's a Facebook and whatever. My thing is it's about the capabilities. It's about digital twins, digital thread, simulating everything. Real-time data being used in the simulation. It's immersive. If I want to look at it on a 2D screen or a 3D monitor, or I want to put on a VR headset and the two of us are doing a review of a design, you might be on your computer, I'm in a VR headset, but we're sharing that and we're scribbling and design review or whatever you want to call it. It's persistent. It's always there. You can have teams across the world all working on the same design at the same time, and there's no version control issues where I'm sending around drawings to you and then you get the wrong one and you update the wrong one and all this kind of stuff. So to me, it's that convergence of technologies to enable digitization on steroids of your production. But you have to be able to tie that back then to, well, what are the challenges today? We've seen what happened with supply chain shocks with COVID, the war in Ukraine. You now have all the fun and games with tariffs and, you know, here today, gone tomorrow, back again the day after. Now that is not a technology problem, but that is a massive problem, right, for anyone trying to make a business decision. But you have to have flexibility in your system to go, well, how do I deal with this? If tariffs are 10%, hit return. And be able to understand, well, what's the impact on the supply chain? What's in my warehouse? What's the cost of the stuff going out the door? So unless everything is joined up in this massive digital ecosystem, and I don't believe we talk about the industrial metaverse, it is not a new product. It is not a new data lake or data swamp or whatever. Because we now have APIs, because we now have all the interoperability standards, they're not all perfect, but we're getting a lot more, we're getting less standards and they're better. The ability to be able to kind of in real time be able to go, well, if this order comes in from this customer, can I simulate that? Can we make that? Or will that have implications on productive maintenance? And can we run another shift, or will anything break? And the sales guy can almost kind of run the simulation of the factory and say, yeah, we can take that order. So you can make more informed business decisions. So to me, the industrial metaverse, now people have been talking about Industry 4.0. People are now talking about Industry 5.0, which is everything to do with digitalization, but with humans in it. We talk about virtual factories. We talk about smart factory. You know, you can pick your buzzword. I personally believe industrial metaverse is the term that I think is the best fit, because it also brings in the economy. And whether that's tokenizing your digital twin, and if I give you this, you'll give me that. And, you know, there's a whole different economy building around those platforms as well, right? And the way we work, especially now around the AI and models and stuff. To me, the industrial metaverse is basically the digitization of industries on steroids. And where I kind of saw this first, and it's like digital first, where I came up with the energy metaverse was, I was working with some companies. They were looking at building new battery factories. They were looking at building a new offshore wind, new offshore transmission station. There was no legacy. Now, it's easier if there's no legacy. You design everything digitally upfront. You simulate the hell out of it. And I don't mean just nice, you know, little fly-through videos to show the investors. You write the software that will run the turbines and you simulate how they will work. And you write the software and you simulate it all together on how you will configure the production line with the conveyor belts and the robots. And now you have physical AI and yada, yada, yada. Everything is done before anyone digs a hole in the ground. So to me, the energy transition, and that's kind of segueing into the thing, the energy transition, new builds and energy transition, that was the industrial metaverse happening in front of our eyes. Now, it's not that easy, but if you go back then and say, I have an existing factory, I have existing energy assets, so everything to do with refineries and oil fields and gas fields, it's all existing. That's harder to make everything digital because you've got lots of legacy systems. You can't even start from scratch. And like, if you were starting from scratch, one of the things I would mandate to companies is that from the day you think about a project until you decommission it, you got to think of the naming conventions and the schema for it, because today what kills us is that everybody uses different naming conventions and asset tags and whatever. So you have all these silos of info. So I believe that if you have the same naming convention, you have unified namespace with new specs, you have OpenUSD from NVIDIA and many others, yada, yada, yada. I think the industrial metaverse is inevitable. You know, whether you call it digitization 6.0 or whatever you want to call it, but that's where we're headed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, completely. So let's just, for the sake of our audience, so let's separate the term industrial metaverse and digital twins, because you touched both. So I think just, I know that, of course, we can make an entire podcast with this topic. And I'm sure during this, I think while we speak, I think we'll use probably some of the videos that you put in some of your parts, some image for people listening, but just to distinguish between the two.
So to me, a digital twin is the foundational building block of anything we're doing digitally. And what I mean by that is if I'm designing a new product, I'm designing a new computer mouse, I will design that in a CAD system, computer-aided design. And I'll design everything in it, and depending on how many physics models and whatever I need, I will simulate everything. That's a digital twin of what I am going to build. That digital twin, piece of software, data, is then sent off to some company and says, build that. And they go off and they build a production line to build that device and all of the technology and whatever. They will have a digital design for how they will lay out the production line. That's a digital twin of the production line. And as I then, it's probably a bad example, but if this was a wind turbine, when I'm running the digital twin, because I have designed, when I'm running the wind turbine, because I have all of the sensors and all the IoT, industrial IoT data coming off it, I will have real-time data on my control system showing me how that wind turbine is working right now. That's a digital twin. So in its simplest thing, the way and there are lots of religious discussions about what's a digital twin and what's not, and what capabilities. My basic understanding, or my basic way of saying it to people is, look, a digital twin is a digital representation of something that either will exist, might exist, or does exist in the real world today. Now, you could say an SAP system is a digital twin. It's not very graphical, no disrespect to the SAP folks, or an Oracle database, but that's a digital twin. For the industrial metaverse and where we're headed, and again, whatever word you want to use for where we're headed, all of those silos have to start working together. And it can't be that I'm using different naming conventions and then I have to do all this translation layer between them, and that costs money. That's incredibly complex. So if you start out and you have the same naming conventions across the different silos, AI is now forcing companies to break down the silos, because the only way I can train my AI is to give it all the data I can get. So that's a net win for everybody. And then I start having, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the digital thread. It is not that I take all the digital twins that I have and create another big digital twin because I'm copying all the data, because then you get into data replication and storage and all sorts of fun and games. But if I can somehow pull the data from each of the relevant silos through APIs when I need it, because the view that the guy running the plant needs is very different from the CFO running the supply chain needs. But if I can pull from the same, the one version of the truth, that to me is what the industrial metaverse is about. And you can extend that out into your supply chain. I was at EMO in in Hanover a couple of weeks back, came across a small company. They had a digital twin. Gimineers was their name. What they were doing was, let's say you were making the blades for a turbine that goes into an aircraft engine. They're made in a CNC milling machine, whatever, incredible stuff. Additive manufacturing and 3D metal printing, and. So all of these machines, someone sends a design, the thing goes in and it spins around and it cuts the thing. Down to micron level, everything is measured in real time as the machine is working to make sure that it's within spec. They take all of that data and they have a digital twin of that exact part that they can send to a customer. And I can then build this, I can then say, well, I have 15 of these or 50 of these things in my in my engine. I can build all of these in together. I get a digital twin of how it left the factory. At a level of detail, so digital twins are foundational building blocks. Now, I have a blog post out there, the thing in the industry is, well, my digital twin's better than your digital twin. And you can have a long discussion about that. And I'm going, it all depends on what you're trying to do. Now, for anyone into digital twins or want a better understanding, I would recommend what the Digital Twin Consortium are up to. They have, instead of a maturity level, they have a digital twin periodic table of characteristics. Because one of the things I do with a lot of companies, and it drives some people nuts, but I'll go into a meeting and they'll be talking about digital twins and I'll stop everything and I'll go, give out post-it notes, or if we're online, I'll go in the messenger right now, write down what you mean by a digital twin and what you want it to do. And if you ask 10 people, unless they're very coordinated, I guarantee you'll get 10 different answers. So digital twin is one of these terms that fundamentally foundational building block, but there's no one digital twin is better than the other ones, because some will be 3D, some will be physics models, whatever. But if you don't have digital twins, you're never going to get to the industrial metaverse because you have no digital representation of what you're doing. Does that make sense?
No, it's amazing, and I think you explain it in multiple layers that I think is important for people listening. Is a masterclass. Thank you so much. And as well, a lot of important things, like you said, that most of the companies have to go into this. Because I think, for instance, if you look at well, actually any industry, but from governments to cities, to construction, to of course infrastructure and so forth, you can actually save so much and you can increase sustainability in a lot of different areas. I'm talking about that. So one of your areas of expertise, and I want to go for point 3, energy transition. So this is a big thing because, of course, we are in a world that is more angry than ever for energy, especially with all the AI, data centers, consumption, cloud computing, but as well all the challenges about sustainability related with carbons and well, climate change, a lot of different things. So this is a big topic in itself because it affects all of us. But I want to see how we look at it, because I know that you have a lot of expertise, both working with big companies specializing in energy and as well as a researcher and thought leader.
So the energy transition for me is inevitable, right? And whether it's cost or politics or whatever, we just have to move to new forms of energy, and we will. It just depends on how fast and potentially how much damage we'll have done by the time we get there. I go to a lot of the big energy events. I'm off at ADIPEC in a couple of weeks. You have Gas Tech, you have Distributech, CERAWeek, Inlet Europe. When it comes to energy, in many cases, like I always say, the technology is the easy bit. So creating digital twins and offshore wind and small modular reactors are coming down the line, and fusion, hopefully. I'm still a big fan of hydrogen as a way of as a battery for storing energy if you have lots of wind and whatever. But most of the fun and games today around the energy transition, to be quite honest, is led by politics and ideologies. You're either for it or against it or whatever, and it's been weaponized. I think it's quite amusing in some ways. So I was at CERAWeek back in March in the US, big oil and gas conference. A lot of my friends are, let's say, oil and gas people. LNG terminals being built to export more LNG to Europe. New administration in the US, not very renewables friendly, and so I was chatting to them and I was saying, well, regardless of the technology, what's going on. And they were going, Kev, you know, plenty of oil and gas around here in the Gulf and whatever. We'll start drilling if the price of oil goes above a certain level. But if it doesn't make money. What are you doing today? Oh, we're deploying solar and batteries because that's where the money is in Texas right now for grid stability, regardless of political affiliation and what's being said. It's practical realism. We talk about AI and the impact there, and AI is hitting the energy industry from both sides. The energy demand and all the other raw materials. Now, the other thing about AI data centers is not just energy, it's water. So depending on where you put a giga data center, or as NVIDIA would call it, an AI factory, there's a lot of environmental stuff you need to figure out first. But I need more energy to drive the AI factory to be able to create the foundational models that will then create new materials that I can use in the energy industry to be more efficient. So it's not an either or, right? So there's benefit and thing, but how do you weigh that up when it hasn't been done yet? That's a hard one. But to just give an idea of the complexity of today's world, because of geopolitics, because of whatever, and I don't speak for these companies, but just give you an idea. Everybody in the US was saying, well, we have loads of gas, natural gas, LNG. We can burn gas to power the data centers. You can. You just need to build a gas-fired power plant. Standard technology, easy to do, blah, blah, blah. Need a gas turbine. You go to the suppliers of gas turbines today and say, I need a new gas turbine. They say, great, I'll put you down for 2031 because we're full. GE Vernova, I believe, we're going to open a new gas plant, or a new factory in the US in April to build more gas turbines. And because of all the geo instability and tariffs and whatever, they stopped the project, put it on hold. So the energy transition will happen and is happening. And I think the thing that gives me a lot of optimism that we humans will do the right thing is it's got to be ground up. So it's people putting solar on the roof, buying an electric vehicle, putting in a battery so that they're more grid resilient. And I'm very hopeful that in fairness to the US administration, the current one, they're putting in more money into small modular reactors. I think they have to be part of the mix going forward and around the world. And the other thing they're kind of putting money into is geothermal, which is an area of energy that we've kind of neglected. Like Iceland is 100% geothermal, well, not 100, but almost. A lot of hydro as well. But theoretically, we can all use geothermal almost anywhere on the planet to get energy. Now, it's cost and what's the benefit and whatever. So the energy transition, I think, is just going to keep happening regardless of politicians come and go. And I'm not a big fan of people saying, well, it has to be this technology or that technology. I think it's a mix, but it does, and this is back to, I suppose, my, let's say, business background. It does come back down to, well, how much of a bet are you going to take on this? And hydrogen will need state support to make it work, right? Like we did with the petrol industry 100 years ago. There's still subsidies for oil and gas companies today. So it's not that they don't get subsidies. We just need people need to make a strategic decision and stick with it. What you can't have is somebody coming into government and saying, we're doing hydrogen. And then 2 years later, it's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing something else. And then 2 years later, no one's going to invest in that. Now, there's a lot of companies still doing electrolyzers and LNG, H2 tankers and. So I think it's coming. It's just not happening fast enough, if that makes sense.
No, completely. So you touch, and I think for the last topic related to your areas of expertise, so AI and data. So from energy transition to AI and data, and specifically, let's look at AI data centers. You touched the importance of water, but as well, there's a huge AI divide around the world. And there's two layers of AI divide. There's the AI divide in terms of education, which is something that you and me are very focused in our work. And then there's the AI divide in terms of mostly just two parts of the world that have some kind of AI infrastructure, which is the US and a bit of Canada and a bit of Europe, not even all Europe. And of course, China is a different ball game. But we have a big challenge that most of the world, if you look at AI infrastructure, is on the dark. And even AI education, AI infrastructure, and so forth. But this is key because, of course, everything will touch. So I want to see how you see the AI in terms of industry in terms of business, but as well how this is going to impact our society, and as well what you can do to mitigate the risks that are related with this.
Oof. So let me take that in kind of 4 steps. First one, I have never seen a technology have as much impact in such a short period of time as generative AI has had in the last 2 years across the board. And I've seen a lot of technologies come and go over the decades. And AI is here and here to stay. So whatever, it's here. And now it's kind of back to the digital twin discussion. When I go travel around and people go, oh, we've got AI, I'll be like, great, what kind of AI? Because in industry, we've had AI for decades. You've had machine learning, human-assisted machine learning, you know, yada, yada. Now, when you get up into the, let's say, the latest generative AI and the models that we see with ChatGPT and Claude and Mistral and, like, this is mind-blowing stuff. And I think the ChatGPT and others in some ways have democratized the energy, the technology. People can access it. Now I'll come back to that in a second, because that still creates a divide. Not everyone can access it, right, and to the same level. So AI is here to stay. Anybody who thinks the bubble's going to burst. Now there's bubbles and investment and whatever, but the technology is not going to burst. It's baked in. I think the biggest challenge in industry in the next 12 and 18 months is companies are pouring tens, hundreds of millions into, you know, I suppose for people that are familiar with the industry, you have the companies like OpenAI and all the big guys creating their own large language models. So you need the massive AI factory to process all the raw data and come up with the model. That's massive energy and water and whatever. That's a massive investment. Once you have the model, ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 5, then people can use it for inference. So I go to the website and I type in something and it gives me something. Or I take that model or a subset of it and I put it in an industrial PC sitting in the factory to do some specific AI assist work. Whether that's help me with the error code or optimize my production line by figuring out how I can optimize things based on taking all the data. A lot of companies, industrial companies, you'll hear a lot of people talking about, well, we're building our own foundational model, because the type of AI you use to run a factory is not a large language model that, you know, has read the Library of Congress. It's different. It's real-time data. It's physics-based. It's blah, blah, blah. So very different models. Very hard to do, but incredible stuff going on out there for their agentic AI and. But what I do see going on today is everyone's going, well, we got to invest in it, because if you're not in the AI race, you're not, you know, it's go big or go home. But everyone's trying to figure out how they'll make money out of it. And what I mean by that is that if you go off and you're a company and you create your own foundational model and you create your chatbots and you create your whatever, that is a significant investment of time, effort, people, and money. You have to recoup that thing. And it's back to the usual thing of, you know, we made a wind turbine. Do you now add the cost of the AI service on top? Most of your customers will go, I want it, but I'm not going to pay more. So I think there's a lot of people now starting to go, well, hang on a second, because every CEO in the world has been beaten up by their board or investors going, what are you doing with AI? So they have to go off and do stuff. But the business model, I don't think, is fleshed out yet for a lot of companies. So I think we'll see a bit of, everyone's got AI projects, but I'm not sure how people have figured out what. And again, you've got an AI project. What are you doing? Oh, it's helping finance do stuff. It's helping people have Copilot on their desktop so they can write emails better. As opposed to, we have an AI trying to optimize how we manage our transmission network for France. Like, they're very different things. So there's a lot of people feeling out, but we'll see AI impact our lives look at our phones, all the apps that have AI built in and stuff, right? So it's not going away, and I don't think AI is going to take all our jobs. AI, someone with it, I don't know who classified as a bit of a cliche. Someone who knows how to use AI will take her job. So it's not going away. I think on the divide piece, I think we'll see that at all levels of society. And what I mean by that is I would probably say that there are people in business today, brilliant business people, and they're kind of ignoring the impact of AI. And they could find themselves in a digital divide very quickly in the workforce in pick any country. I think where it gets more challenging going forward, and if you look at, I do a good bit of stuff with NVIDIA, with Rev Levardian and the team. I was at GTC in Paris with them, and they made a great point that a lot of countries will need their own AI factories, their own AI models for their own sovereignty. Now, you could say NVIDIA have a vested interest that everyone has to build their own AI factory, and I'll give them, spade a spade. But at the same time, they have a point. And Europe is falling behind. Now, thank goodness you have Mistral and a couple of companies. And in the industrial space, we have a huge opportunity here in Europe to have, like I said, the industrial AI capital, as opposed to the large language models and whatever. They're complementary, but they're different. But then people have to have access to it. So if a certain country doesn't have a big AI factory for their own language models and their own companies to be able to use, you could end up in a world in 5 years' time where to get access to the latest models is a pay to play, and if you don't have the money, you can't be competitive enough. It's like if I didn't have a railroad 200 years ago, my town died. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen with whatever, but that's the kind of strategic shift that's going on, and every country will have to, in some ways, look after itself. Now, I know that's an awful thing to say in the world we're in today, where we have more protectionism but I think that's a feature. You mentioned the education system. When I was growing up outside Bandon back in the 70s, my father had a small encyclopedia behind his chair. It was the Collins Encyclopedia of natural history and whatever. So when I was doing homework, if whatever I was doing homework on, if it was in those books, it existed. But there was no internet and there was no library in the village and whatever. That was my access to information. Or my father would tell me, or my mother, or somebody. You look at today, we have the World Wide Web and the internet and blah blah blah. I know you have ChatGPT. I have no idea how if you're a teacher today, how do you integrate AI into the curriculum and doing homework and whatever, right? It's baffling for me. So I do think we need to start thinking about what are the skills we need to give people, given that these things are tools, and how do you? But God, Dinis, I have no idea what that answer is. But if societies like in the UAE, they're giving everyone free license to ChatGPT, which I think is people can use it or not, they have their choice, but at least they have access. But that's democratizing it. But then they have the budget for that. What happens with other countries when people don't have that budget? And are we in danger of exacerbating the digital divide? I think we are, and I know it's a trite thing to say, but I'll come back to human nature. We've been doing this throughout our history. We haven't learned a lot as nice people to raise all boats at the same time. We'll go faster than those guys because then we'll have a competitive advantage, and that's human nature.
Yeah, very good points and incredibly important. So I know that is a big interview. So I have 3 last questions. Okay, so I go for the first one. I know that is a big one, but you have fantastic insights. I want to do this for a long time. So you previously mentioned and highlighted the importance of advocacy, tech scouting, and all these things related. So I want to touch this because it's something that I think people are not understanding the importance and the value of this, and as well how to commercialize and bringing this to businesses.
Having been in various large, excellent corporations over my career, I have seen firsthand where you can get a bit of tunnel vision. And what I mean by that is, you're living and eating and creating your own Kool-Aid. So you have a particular view of the world. So I think there's a huge benefit of, call it tech scout, outside in, devil's advocate role, where people can come in and go, look, you might not like what I'm going to say, but you guys are living in your own bubble. And here's what other people are saying, or here's what your customers are saying. And you need to listen. You mightn't agree, but at least listen. Anecdotally, I ended up in Compaq way back when strategic marketing. I was the launch spokesperson for the first chip we put in a tablet, right? And Intel was late to the party. But like for 2 years before that, I was part of a team that said the iPad, that'll never work, right? So I'm not infallible, to say the least. So I have a bunch of T-shirts that got that wrong. So when I see companies and they're very, very focused, very set, I always say to them, you need to take a step back, and maybe an outside perspective might just throw some light on it. I think I admire companies that are incredibly tunnel vision and they're focused on what they're doing, but there's so much changing out there today. It doesn't mean that you change your decision, but they got to be aware that the world's a complicated place out there, if that makes sense. So I work with a couple of accelerators in different companies, and it's kind of go back in once every 6-9 months, and in some ways, because I'm external, because I have no skin in the game, I'm not an investor, I'm not a shareholder, I'm not looking for a job there, whatever. Here's what you told me 12 months ago. What have you done? and just hold them accountable. Now, it's like, well, why didn't you do that? And if they have a good answer, it's like, well, that's fine. Or if I go, that's a crap answer. It's my opinion, but it's just, I think people need to take a step back, because sometimes we become so, and I've seen it myself in my own career, you just become so wound into we're doing the right thing. And look at Intel, God forbid, where they were 8 years ago and where they are today. The world is full of companies that were on the right path, and it's like, ooh, we're wrong path. How did that happen?
Yeah, that is. I think that we need a bit of humility and capacity to adaptation, because sometimes you get into especially if you have some success, you get into your belly. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
And I obviously I have a vested interest in being the guy who comes in and does something, but I have seen company, I've said it to people, is that I will say what I will say. Sometimes internally in a company, people don't have that advantage, because it could be career limiting.
It's true,
right? And because when you talk to people afterwards or before or whatever, they'll be, well, why didn't you say that? It's like, well, I want a job for the next 4 years.
Yes, it's a key thing. And this level of honesty as well. Of course, you have different layers, but yeah, fantastic insight. So last 2 questions. One is quite big, but you touched that, and I could not pass without it. So quantum computing, of course, this is a massive question, but let's look at it probably in a short term, medium, long term, and a bit of how you see that.
So quantum computing is coming. It depends on how fast and whatever, and again, it depends on what industry you're in and what you're trying to do and whatever. But here's my take. Companies like IBM and others are running programs with companies today to say, are you quantum safe? And what that means is that, have you got any cryptography code buried inside in something that someone wrote 20 years ago, that when quantum computers do arrive, you're exposed? It's kind of like the year 2000 problem for those of us that were around back then, right? With it, whatever. So today, everybody, if that's not on your to-do list in terms of, yeah, we need someone to start thinking about quantum safe, regardless. That has to be on your to-do list today, if not too late already. The next one then is that, well, what's quantum computing going to do in my industry? And that kind of comes back to, well, let's assume, and there's various technologies out there for quantum, and I don't ask me to explain how they work, but some of them are being used or simulated, but some of them are starting to be used, and the amount of qubits you need and whatever. But as more reliable systems pop up over the next couple of years, and it might be 16 qubits, 24, 64, whatever, you might need 10,000 qubits to do some of them incredible astrophysics simulations. We're not there yet. But if someone has a functioning and the error rate has got down, and then they might be able to run a pharmaceutical algorithm much faster than what you can do in classical computing today. And it's not that quantum computing is going, you're going to replace your data center with AMD. The data center you have today with Intel and AMD and Qualcomm and whatever chips, you're not going to throw that away and put in a quantum computer instead. The quantum computer is going to be there to do certain jobs, and you need all the other stuff as well. So I think every industry needs to start going, well, what if this does start working, what's the implications for us in point step? But I given the human capital and the cleverness of the people that are building the quantum computers that are out there today, it's a question of when, not if. And it's coming at us. Now, then, of course, you get into the whole thing that, well, when quantum computing does arrive and properly, what happens to all our encryption and the blockchains and blah, 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 right? So I think everybody needs to call it a risk assessment, or at least have a roadmap of, if this stuff arrives, at what stage do we need to really start worrying about it? And is it a competitive advantage to get ahead now, or will we cross that bridge when we get there? But it's coming. Depending on who you ask, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. But again, I kind of go back to, well, how many qubits do you need? If you don't need that many, you can do stuff today.
It's a key element that is going to be, and of course, there's already Microsoft, IBM, like you mentioned, are going.
New materials, new designs, using photonics, using things down at Kelvin, other people doing it is an incredible field. I have had I've had the opportunity to sit down with some of the IBM senior researchers. I grew up in a world where digital computing was 1 and 0. My brain is not wired for the 1, 0 and maybe. Quantum entanglement, do not get me to explain that. I don't know, but it's coming.
No, it's part of everything we're going to be taking forward. So last question, and it's been a fantastic marathon. So you have a fascination for science fiction, and I know from even your background image to a lot of things. So let's
that's my whiteboard. Oops, wrong way. Sorry.
I like it.
Gadgets.
So one of the things that I want to touch, so in science fiction, there's kind of a lot of different narratives how we see society. And there's a technologist that you've been, I think you probably can touch in multiple layers, because you have the layer of corporations, the layer of advocacy and working with communities. And as well, you are very focused on education and different areas. So when you look at this science fiction, especially with all the innovations that we just mentioned here, from metaverse to AI to quantum computing, all of this will keep creating an acceleration of what means to be human, how we're going to be working in society, all the transition of energy, and even the different parts. So from this science fiction, what is the narrative that you kind of would like to highlight? Because I always like to ask this, and I ask this question to me a lot. One of the things I'm doing probably is a provocation for you. I'm writing in my new book, and I'm writing it looking at, what is the utopian version of humanity by 2050, 2100, if we let AIs take control, because you're going to have robotics from digital twins, and robots will be with us in the next 5 years in a big scale. And you are actually dealing with this. For instance, if you look at all the automation and industrial metaverse and so forth, it's already massive, changing and challenging. But at the same time, there's new jobs, like your job of mine, that would not be possible just a couple of years ago. So how you see this, but using models of science fiction. And of course, if you look at the major narratives around science fiction, you probably have Star Wars, Matrix, Star Trek, and then the list goes in much more layers. So I want to touch this, I think, bringing a level of entertainment and kind of more the different parts of our narratives.
So I suppose I'll go back to when I was growing up in the village outside Bandon. We had the county council library bus would turn up every 2 weeks, and I used to put in, you'd be able to write down what you wanted and you get the book and I'd be reading it. So back in the day, I started reading Dune and the Dune series. You mentioned Star Wars, Star Trek, Blade Runner. You have the guy who created the metaverse. I'm a big fan of The Expanse, Battlestar Galactica, yada, 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 yada. Some of them are fairly dystopian in terms of the have and the have-nots and how the AIs to go terminate, whatever. Like if you read Dune, the whole machine crusade is people trying to get back at the robots and whatever. Some of those were written in this, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. And you kind of roll forward to today, and I kind of go, wow, these guys were real futurists. And you can call it science fiction, but it you could have a long debate. I'm not sure if because someone wrote that you had the transcorder in Star Trek, we've kind of created mobile phones, or was there a cart and a horse, or which came first, or chicken and egg? But I do think that I respect and I understand a lot of the abundance theories, but I will go back to what I said at the very start. Human nature hasn't changed. And I don't care race, religion, color, whatever. Human nature hasn't changed. And since the day somebody figured out that a stick could be used as a tool or a weapon, we will find ways of messing things up. If we were having this conversation 20 years ago with the rise of the internet, you could have said that, with the internet, we'll all have access to truthful information and the world will be a happy place. And yet we are in the world we're in today, where how you define truth is probably more questionable than ever was before. I'm still optimistic that human nature will kind of muddle our way through it, because we always have up to now. Some people tell me that, we really need a rational and non-biased AI to kind of do things properly. My answer to that is the last thing we want is an unbiased and rational AI, because it will make a decision going, I know what's wrong with this planet. And we won't like the answer, we humans. So I honestly think that what world will we grow up in? Will it be something like on the wall behind me? I asked, what was it, Midjourney for an industrial metaverse city about 2 years ago. That's what it gave me. And cut a long story short, I do think we'll end up in some. I hope we get to the stars. Because we need to, because we will probably mess up this planet. So we have to get to the stars, and whether it's Dune or Blade Runner or some mix of the above, or we might go back to something like Lord of the Rings or Planet of the Apes after whatever we do bad things. I think we'll muddle along, but I honestly I don't think it'll be human nature. We're just not built for doing the right thing all the time. It's a bit of, I'm still optimistic. But as I say, human nature, we haven't changed.
So that is, I have to push one question. So, especially with your wisdom and the knowledge of working with so much corporations, and I love that you are positive, but you look at all the different science fiction. Like me, I always like to look at science fiction because effectively we learn so much just understanding a lot of the versions they did, and some of them are mind-blowing, from Philip K. Dick to all these different
Asimov and Robot. Yeah. It's incredible, right? Like these guys were 70 years ago.
Yeah, sometimes 100 years. Yeah. So one question I have, because you have a lot of experience dealing with people, it's one of your superpowers that I admire. And as well, you deal with a lot of communities and both corporates, both people, but you have a really genuine pleasure with people. So for people listening to us, especially young people, because one of the challenge I have, especially with young people, is there's two major challenges I see. One is becoming cynical, because it's very easy to become cynical with all the challenge. And second is becoming hopeless, and then you become just part of a trend that goes and criticize everything, but you don't really think what you're doing, which is a big challenge, especially what is happening. Because like we discussed before we went to record, is I believe that at the moment, this kind of digital divide, AI divide, there's different layers, because people in fact to spend, for instance, I use this example as a last provocation for you. I like to provoke. So a lot of people that are criticizing AI spend 5 hours in smartphones, or 10 per day. And at the same time, I remember that one of the people I was working a long time ago was saying, I don't want to use social media. But this was a person leading a major global marketing budget of $10 million using social media, and I didn't use social media on the personal level. And there's a lot of people like that. So there's a paradox between adoption of these technologies or denying, which is even worse, and at the same time the level of how we look at this in a real way and bring it down to earth, like in a positive but realistic way. So I want to, you're positive and you have children and a family, I want to see how you see that as well.
My kids are grown up and gone. I'm a granddad, so I have grandkids. God, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be running the UN. My 2 cents. There is a lot of things wrong. Yeah, I don't care what country you're living in. There'll be things you agree with and things you disagree with. And I think, unfortunately, today, the people who shout loudest get heard more. And they may not necessarily be the wisest or the hidden thing. I remember back in the day, .com thing, we were thinking of, is there any way you can build an app with augmented reality that when any politician says anything, or anyone says anything, you can it'll overlay over them all their sponsors or who gave them money. So if they're talking about energy policy and you see there's all the oil and gas companies have given them political contributions, you can it's back to the truth, right? You can kind of go, well, I know why they're saying that, all right, some idea. But I digress. I'm a big believer in, if you don't vote, you lose your right to criticize. And I know a lot of people are going, what's the point? They're all the same, plaguing all their houses and whatever. And I see it in my own family, I see it in others, but I'm kind of going, people died over the centuries to get you a vote. Use it. And it might be you're picking the best of the bad lot, but what do you call it? You don't vote, then you kind of lose, in my opinion, you lose your right to criticize. Now, some people will say that's very 20th century, Kev. We're now in the 21st century. But like the alternative, if you look at history, is that when the elites ignore all the people, you have the French Revolution or something like that, right? And who says that won't happen again in any country? But I think it's ideally, try and get involved. Like I admire anyone who goes into politics today, because my head is kind of going, why would you go into politics? Like, God, like the abuse and whatever. But I do think, and whether it is, it's not that social media caused all this. It's a tool, right? I think it's just a human development or whatever. But if any politician tries to explain to somebody rationally what they need to do for the energy transition, or around rational laws for AI or whatever, there's no rational discussion anymore. It's all sound bites and then you're shouted down. And I think people need to kind of step back a small bit and understand that all of these things have consequences. Like, I'm all for freedom of speech, but it's not freedom of no consequence. You can say what you want, but there will be consequences. So I think people, get your voice heard. And if you have a vote, vote. Because you either change the system from within, or we will end up tearing it all down and building something else. But I think Yeah, kind of switching off and going, it doesn't, you know, we have, when you see like 40% of a population voting, you got to wonder, like, what are the other 60% thinking about? Now, that's no answer. That's just my own philosophical viewpoint, but it's a tough one. I think the thing that I'm kind of, the flip side of that, and I'll just throw it out there. I talk about immersive experiences, and we have Gaussian splatting now and 3D models, and. I think how young people are engaging on things like Minecraft, Fortnite, Spotify, like, it's not that they're all creators or whatever, but they're using tools and technologies to connect with people that they never connected with before. And I think sometimes we miss that, as that my generation, let's say. We kind of see things that, well, this is the way we always did it, and you need to go and vote, and you need to be part of a political party or whatever. I think there's a lot of different layers in how society is being constructed right now. And the people in power can't ignore that. But how do you engage with them? And you know, I suppose, like, one of the things I kind of do when I travel around is when I see a government, or I see a prime minister, or I see what age are they? And if they're very young, I'd be like, interesting. That's pretty cool for that country. So it don't know. I'm still hopeful, but I can see where a lot of people younger than me would be kind of going, sure, what's that point? They're all the same, and that's bad. But that's on all of us to change. It's not their fault.
Oh, it's I completely amen. That's what I would say. And well, it's been a fantastic, almost 2 hours interview. So I wanted to do this. It's great. For people listening to us, I want to thank you for this special moment, for all the wisdom that you share with me and with everyone listening to us around the world. But as well, I would like them to follow you, engage with you, because definitely your knowledge and as well your positive approach towards dealing with big corporations, with the advocacy of technology, learning and teaching, and it's quite unique. And all these areas that you spoke here are more important than ever. So Kevin, congratulations for your body of work and research, and for your positivity and fantastic energy. And as well, as you see on your side, all the badges of all the events that you go, which is a lot of network, a lot of people as well. That shows as well the experience, but as well the passion you have for all these events, because it implies a lot of energy, and very few people don't have that energy, which is as well, for success, like you said, you need energy, you need to shout and push forward, but you need as well to have a fantastic soul. So it's been an honor to have you here. I hope it's the first of a lot of others will go, and continue wishing you all the success. Thank you so much.
Come here, thank you so much, and I certainly enjoyed it, and we've met up at a bunch of events in the past. I'm sure we'll meet up again, and yeah, no, I look, as I keep kind of saying, you know, people say, oh, the technology and where's it headed and whatever. If I knew what that answer was, I'd have resigned. I'd have retired years ago. I made billions. But I think it's just about being flexible, and it is. I'm optimistic. It's fun times ahead. But if you think things were moving at a pace in the last decade, you know, it's like, buckle up, like, you know, we're just getting started, like, you know. So it's interesting times. But no, thank you very much.
My honor. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode. Please share your thoughts, questions, or a topic you want next in the comments section. My team and I read them all and will tailor our future videos around your feedback. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. Until next time, stay healthy and informed.